welcome. I'm Sarah, the voice that opens each episode of You're Probably Right. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you found us. This show is built on real experiences and honest reflection. Nothing rushed, nothing performative, just conversations meant to meet you where you are. In a moment, you'll hear from MCM, the voice behind this space. Each episode comes from lived experience and thoughtful insight, not trends or quick takes. So get a drink, fluff your pillow, or just press pause on the outside noise.
What's up, y'all? This is MCM, and you're listening to You're Probably Right. I have a special one for you today. Really special. It's different, I think. But I guess we'll see. It's episode 296. Yes, number 296. Not just 296, because you know what I realize? Some people who have these podcasts and they have these astronomical numbers at the beginning will be like episode 3007 or 3765 or some, whatever, like just some random number. It'll be like really their episode number 14. So yeah, I've been going strong, pretty strong for the past few years. Not bad. Podcast started officially, I guess, because this name is different from the one I had prior to that, since January 2021. First episodes, there were 2 or 3. I think I've only been able to find one, and that is one of the first episodes. I don't believe it's the first episode, but yeah, I've come a long way. I wouldn't even dare try to listen to one of those personally. But a lot of the new, a lot of the old ones, the first ones, when it comes to my story, my life, I think the things that help me to see the world the way I see it, I talk about in the early episodes here and there. So nothing too sequential, so you're really going to have to listen to everything to know everything, I guess. And I am a person, I guess that's all I'll say about that. Anyways, remember, this episode, like every other episode of You're Probably Right, is for entertainment purposes only. If you learn something, cool. If you're entertained, great. Well, actually great if you learn something too. As I said, you might learn how to do something, and you might learn how not to do things from listening to me, and whatever works, whatever floats that boat, you know what I mean? All right, so let's get right into it. There are stories that don't start with a moment. They start with proximity. Not pursuit, not intention, just the quiet fact of seeing the same person over and over again. You pass them in the same place, at the same time, same back channel, on the same days. You don't plan on it. You don't talk about it. It just happens. And because it keeps happening, something forms. Not because either person is looking for anything, but because the human nervous system is not built to stay neutral in the presence of familiarity. We like to pretend it is, though. We like to say we can separate exposure from attachment, but we can't. Not over time. Most people think connection starts when someone makes a move. When someone texts first. When someone asks someone out. When someone crosses a line. But that's not exactly where most modern connection actually begins. They begin in shared environments, conditions, where avoidance is inconvenient, where ignoring someone takes more effort than to acknowledge them. Just think of where that could be for you. Where eye contact becomes normal. You go places every day and you generally avoid most eye contact. Every once in a while, you might catch somebody's eye and like give them a nod saying hello or something like that, or you may actually say hello. But in the places that I'm talking about, you're seeing these people all the time where small talk becomes routine with these people. Could be 10 people, could be 5 people, could be 200 people or more, where routine becomes familiarity, and familiarity, unchecked, becomes meaning. This is not romance. This is just physics, as they say. And the reason I want to talk about this today is because these kinds of connections are the ones that confuse people the most. It's kind of like the people I'm talking about. Maybe you're seeing the person every day, and then when you do see them at the mall, where you usually avoid eye contact and avoid talking to random people, or just walking down down a busy street downtown Toronto, and then you see this person from that place, that cell, wherever it is that you see them every day, and you happen to be off, maybe it's the weekend or whatever it is, or maybe you're just out of sorts, or maybe just off time, and you happen to see that person from that area or from that place, and you generally go right into, hey, what's going on? Yeah, so I had to do this, and like just automatically they're in your circle even if they're not your friend. These situations don't feel dramatic. They don't feel reckless. They don't even feel wrong while they're happening. They feel slow, casual, almost accidental. Until one day you realize you are emotionally invested in a situation that never actually declared itself. There was no agreement, no title, no clear beginning. And somehow, that makes the ending harder to name. If you're listening to this and you've ever said to yourself, I don't understand how this got so deep. We never decided anything. This episode is for you. If you've ever felt like you were slowly pulled into something that never officially existed, this is for you. If you've ever walked away from a connection without a fight, without a blow up, without closure, and still felt like something was taken from you, well, this is especially for you. Because this is not a story about love, and it's not a story about a villain or villains. It's a story about systems, about how two people can occupy the same emotional space for a long time without ever agreeing on what that space is. And how one person can leave relatively intact while the other is left trying to understand what just happened. Not because anybody lied, but because the structure itself was unstable. There were two people. I'm going to call one of them the stabilizer and the other the hub. Not because those were their identities, but because that's the role each one played in the system that formed between them. You might be somebody else's stabilizer. You might be somebody else's hub. Yeah. But in this particular situation, they didn't meet in a dramatic way. There was no spark story worth retelling. They simply existed in the same orbit. They saw each other often enough that familiarity set in before intention ever did, where they would be missed if they weren't around at a specific time and place. Conversation started small, casual, safe. The kind of conversations that don't feel like they're leading anywhere until one day they do. What mattered wasn't what they talked about at first. What mattered was that they talked and then kept talking, and then began to talk in ways that felt more real than surface level, more than surface level conversations they were having everywhere else in their lives. Ideas, frustrations, observations about the world, small admissions, not confessions, just honesty without stakes. That's a beautiful place to be. The stabilizer was good at that. Being present, listening, holding space. He wasn't trying to impress. He wasn't trying to extract anything. He had lived enough life to know that intensity didn't need to be forced. He showed up consistently, calmly. And over time, that calm became attractive. The hub noticed, not consciously at first, but the body noticed before the mind does. The hub began to feel more settled around him, more open, less guarded. This is where people usually say, see that attachment? That's attachment. But it's not that simple. What formed at first wasn't attachment. It was actually regulation. The stabilizer regulated the room. His presence lowered tension. His attention steadied conversations. He didn't escalate. He didn't rush. He didn't demand. And for someone whose internal world was often busy, often pressured, often scanning for the next problem to solve, that kind of presence felt like relief. Relief is power, and relief gets mistaken for connection all the time. As the conversation deepened, so did the access. Texting entered the picture. Not flirtatious at first, just available, reliable, and then slowly the tone shifted. Sorry, guys. Sorry about that, guys. Oh man, crazy stuff happens here. I'm here moving around. This chair is making all kinds of noise. I've tried to spray it down a few times. It's just noisy. I need a new chair, but it is comfortable, I must say. Um, Listen, as the conversations deepened, so did access. Texting entered the picture. Not flirtatious at first, just available, reliable. And then slowly the tone shifted, a little more openness, a little more vulnerability, a little more intimacy in the language. Nothing explicit, just enough to feel chosen. And this is where the slope, as they say, gets slippery. Because once communication becomes private, the real rest of the world fades between you two, and you've entered your own world. The shared environment or world is no longer the only place connection happens. Well, the real world, I should say, sorry. It moves into pockets of time that feel separate from the rest of reality, whoever else is around you. And separation creates intensity. Eventually, intimacy crossed from the emotional into the physical. Not explosively, almost quietly, like something that had been building for a while and finally found an outlet. The chemistry was real. Anyone tells you otherwise in situations like this is lying. Chemistry doesn't appear out of nowhere after months of closeness. It arrives because it's been waiting. But here's the thing that most people miss. Even when intimacy is real, it doesn't mean both people aren't integrating in the same way. For the stabilizer now, intimacy meant progression. Not necessarily commitment yet, but movement. A sense that something was being built slowly, carefully. For the hub, intimacy meant relief, release, regulation. A place where walls could come down temporarily without the burden of continuity. Or what is this? And because neither of them named this difference out loud, the system kept running. After moments of closeness, the hub would often pull back just enough to reset the balance. So if you were on a track and you're going to 100 and they got to about 63, the hub would pull back to about 42. Just enough to reset the balance. Nothing dramatic. A text saying things should stay where they are. A reminder that the future wasn't clear. A verbal boundary placed after the fact, not before. These moments weren't meant to hurt. They were meant to stabilize. The hub, well, she thought this made sense. Intimacy had done its job. The system needed to cool down. To the stabilizer now, these moments created confusion. Why deepen something only to immediately flatten it again right after? Why open a door just to close it halfway? But because the stabilizer valued calm and continuity, he didn't challenge it. He didn't want to turn something meaningful into some sort of a negotiation. He assumed that time would clarify what words hadn't. This is where generosity entered the picture. not transactional generosity, not manipulative generosity, just the kind of generosity that comes from wanting to contribute to the life of someone you care about. Gifts, thoughtful ones, practical ones, help when it was needed, support that wasn't asked for but was welcomed. After a while, of course. To the stabilizer, this felt natural. It was how he showed care. To the hub, it felt good, appreciated, and importantly, it didn't feel binding somehow. Because in her internal ledger, receiving didn't equal owing, it equaled being seen. This is where the imbalance began to grow. Not because one person was bad, but because one person was depositing into a system that the other person was using differently. Time passed. Months. Not weeks. And on the surface, nothing looked wrong. There was laughs, familiarity, comfort, even moments of closeness that felt like they could turn into something more if just given the chance. But underneath it all, the structure remained undefined. No rhythm, no routine, no future orientation. Just repeated access and intermittent intensity. And this is the most dangerous kind of connection. Not the chaotic one, not the volatile one, the ambiguous one that feels stable until suddenly, guess what? It isn't. The stabilizer began to notice something. When access was easy, everything flowed. When access required effort, it stalled. When proximity was automatic, the connection felt alive. When it wasn't, it became hard to maintain. And that's when the question started to form. Not out loud, just internally. What is this actually built on? The moment that question appears, the system is already under strain. Because systems that rely on proximity rather than choice doesn't survive scrutiny well. And that's where I want to pause, part one. Because in the next part, we're going to stop telling you the story and start naming what was actually happening underneath it all. We're going to talk about regulation, about why one person can walk away from a situation like this relatively intact and the other person can't, and about why common advice completely fails in connections that are built on repeated proximity instead of deliberate commitment. If you're listening to this and something in your chest feels tight, it's no coincidence. It's a recognition. So they say anyways. All right, check it out. Naming the system without breaking the spell. There's a moment in every situation like this where the story stops being enough. You've replayed the conversations, you've replayed the looks, you've replayed the timing. And none of it quite explains why one person feels like they lost something real while the other seemingly, largely, totally unaffected. That's the moment people reach for labels. Yeah. They start saying things like avoidant and anxious and secure and narcissistic and user, manipulator, nice guy, unavailable, emotionally immature, and the list goes on. And sometimes those words feel helpful for about 5 minutes until they don't, because they explain behavior, they don't explain impact, and they definitely don't explain imbalance. So I want to introduce a different way of looking at what happens here. Not as a relationship problem, not even as attachment mismatch, but as a regulation imbalance that's formed inside of high proximity environments. And once you see it that way, everything that felt confusing starts to totally make sense. I think it probably already has hit some people already. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Modern connections are not built primarily on love. They're built on regulation. Regulation of emotion, regulation of stress, regulation of loneliness, regulation of identity, regulation of future anxiety. We don't just connect because we're attracted to someone. We connect because being around them changes our nervous system and how our nervous system feels. And the stabilizer was very good at that. His presence slowed things down. His attention steadied the room. His consistency created predictability. His generosity softened edges. That doesn't make him weak. It makes him regulating. The hub, whether she knew it or not, was using the regulation to stabilize herself in a period of scarcity. Scarcity isn't just about money. It's about time. It's about support. It's about feeling behind. It's about watching other people have things you don't have yet or used to have and now you don't. When someone lives in that state long enough, they don't seek partners. They seek systems. They look for people who can quietly hold pieces of their life together without asking for too much in return. And that's where the regulation economy begins. Let me say this slowly, because this is the part people miss. In a regulation economy, different people serve different functions. One person might regulate your emotions, another might regulate your finance, another might regulate your sexual validation, another might regulate your sense of being chosen. And because none of these functions are formally named, everyone can tell themselves they're not doing anything wrong. No one promised anything, no one lied. No one technically crossed a line. But the system itself becomes asymmetric. The stabilizer was consistently regulating emotional space. He was regulating tension. He was regulating availability. He was regulating reassurance. The hub was regulating intermittently, moments of intimacy, moments of closeness, moments of vulnerability. But those moments were not designed to sustain the system. They were designed to reset it. This is why intimacy felt real, but never accumulated. And this is where the real imbalance formed. The stabilizer began depositing regulation without a return pathway. Not consciously, not manipulatively, just naturally. That's who he was. And here's the part that's uncomfortable. When someone regulates you without extracting regulation in return, you don't feel indebted. You feel entitled. Not morally entitled, nervously entitled. Their presence becomes part of your baseline. This is why the hub could accept generosity without feeling obligation. This is why she could accept closeness without integration. This is why she could accept intimacy without continuity. To her nervous system, this wasn't exploitation, it was equilibrium. And when equilibrium exists, there's no urgency to change anything. This is why every time the stabilizer hinted at dating someone else, her response was sharp and immediate. Go. Bye. All right, go. That wasn't confidence. That wasn't indifference. That was a preemptive shutdown of a threat. Because the idea of him redirecting his regulation elsewhere destabilizes the system. Not because she wanted him as a partner, no, but because she didn't want to lose the functions that he served. And here's the paradox. She didn't want to compete. She didn't want to commit. But she also didn't want to be replaced. So the only stable option was ambiguity. Ambiguity allows access without obligation. It's like a trick. Ambiguity allows benefits with no commitment. Ambiguity allows exit without guilt. And because the stabilizer valued the calm and the continuity, he didn't collapse that ambiguity. He lived inside of it. This is where people usually say, well, he should have just set boundaries, or he should have walked away, or he should have communicated better. But that advice ignores the constraint. Repeated proximity. You can't simply disappear from someone you see regularly without a cost. You can't create clean distance when visibility is unavoidable. And when you try to stay human inside that constraint, you often overextend instead. So instead of leaving, the stabilizer, like a poor sap, adapted. He stayed kind. He stayed present. He stayed vague about his own weekends. He became nothing. And because nothing broke, the system continued. Of course, until it didn't. Because all systems fail at the point of strain. And the strain showed up when proximity stopped being automatic. Yeah. When the environment changed, when access required effort, they weren't just going to be ushered in to the same space. They would actually have to make an effort. When routine fell away, that's when the truth surfaced. The connection wasn't built on desire alone, it was built on availability. And when availability becomes inconvenient, the system stalled. This is the moment most people experience as rejection. But it's not rejection, it's structural incompatibility being revealed, of course. The stabilizer wanted rhythm, the hub wanted relief. Those are not the same thing. And here's the hardest part to accept: the hub didn't feel like she lost something when it faded, because from her perspective, nothing ended. The regulation simply shifted elsewhere. This is why drift works for one person and devastates the other. Drift allows the person who was extracting regulation to exist without confrontation. Exit without confrontation, when it just drifts away. And it leaves the person who was supplying regulation holding unresolved meaning. Why am I doing this? It's not cruelty, although it does feel cruel to some. That's economics, they say. Regulation economics, that is. And until you see it that way, you'll keep asking the wrong questions. You'll keep asking, did she care? Did it mean anything? Was I used? Was it real? Instead of asking the question that actually matters: was this system solvent? Because once a system becomes insolvent, no amount of communication saves it. In part 3, that's exactly where we're going. We're going to talk about what happens when the system collapses, why naming harm sometimes backfires, why silence can be stabilizing instead of manipulative, and how the stabilizer actually gets out of this without being or becoming bitter or hard. This is where the ending lives. And if you're still listening, it means this isn't abstract to you. Let's finish this properly. Collapse, clarity, and leaving without becoming smaller. Every system breaks the same way. Not with an explosion, not with confrontation, but with quiet loss of tension. The moment the stabilizer stopped overfunctioning, the system began to fail. Not because he made an announcement, not because he made demands and answers and wanted answers, not because the constant background regulation disappeared. He didn't want to withdraw dramatically. He didn't punish. He didn't accuse. He simply stopped filling those gaps that he was filling. And when that happens, something important reveals itself. If a connection collapses when one person stops regulating it, then the connection was never mutual, it was maintained. This is why silence feels powerful in these situations, even when it isn't meant to be. It's not silence as strategy, it's silence as absence of labor. The hub felt the shift, not intellectually, nervously. Conversations felt flatter, access felt less reliable. The emotional safety wasn't as available. But because ambiguity had always been the operating system, there was no language to address the change directly. You can't confront the loss of something you never acknowledged having. So instead of confrontation, there was containment, distance, neutrality, surface friendliness. This is where people often misinterpret what's actually happening. You see, they think the hub is cold or cruel or avoidant. But what's really happening is internal conflict. When someone has used a person for regulation and the regulation is removed, one of the two things happen. Either they move towards the source to restore the equilibrium, or they harden to prevent dependence. In this case, hardening won. Not because the stabilizer wasn't valuable, but because dependence felt dangerous. And here's the part that rarely said out loud. The hub could not afford to fully acknowledge what the stabilizer had provided without also acknowledging what she had taken. And that kind of self-awareness requires emotional bandwidth that she just didn't have. So instead, the system resolved itself the only way it could, by fading. This is why naming harm often fails in situations like this. When the stabilizer finally articulated that he was hurt, that the ambiguity, had cost him something, it didn't lead to repair. It led to closure without accountability. I should have been more direct. That sentence, that sounds like ownership, but it's actually containment. It acknowledges confusion without addressing extraction. It closed the loop emotionally without reopening the system. And for someone in survival mode, that's enough. The stabilizer didn't get the validation he thought it would help because the harm wasn't intentional, it was structural. No apology can rebalance a system that wasn't built on unequal regulation. Only withdrawal can. And this is where dignity is either lost or reclaimed, because the stabilizer faces a choice, or faced. He can reinterpret the entire experience as a personal failure, as weakness, as foolishness, as being used, or he can see it clearly. He was not wrong for showing up. He was not wrong for being generous. He was not wrong for valuing continuity. He was simply operating in a system that did not return what it consumed. And the moment he stopped trying to extract meaning from someone who could not provide it, something important happened. His nervous system recalibrated. Not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily. He stopped scanning for her reactions. He stopped interpreting natural behavior as signal. He stopped waiting. And when that happens, something subtle but powerful occurs. The person who once held the system together becomes lighter. Not because he won, but because he no longer carries weight that was never his to begin with. This is what people mean when they say, focus on yourself. But this is the part they never explain. It's not self-improvement. It's regulation, reclamation. You stop supplying stability where it is not reciprocated. Just that simple. And it's not to say never give anything to anyone who can't give back the same to you. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying in a situation where it's supposed to be a commitment, or it's supposed to be an agreement, or it's supposed to be some sort of thing that you can name between two people, entities, we'll just say people, two, a man and woman. And if it's not being reciprocated, there is stability, but it's not being reciprocated. What if that person who is stabilizing the whole situation, something happens to them, or they're not able to fully function? What happens to the relationship? You understand? You got one side working really hard and the other side barely working when it comes to the relationship. So you stop supplying stability where it's not reciprocated, and you don't announce it. You don't weaponize it. You simply live differently. And that's the real ending. There are connections that don't end with a breakup. They end with a recalibration. You don't lose the person, you lose the role you played in their life. And that loss hurts. Not because you were rejected, but because you were useful in ways that were never named. If you're listening to this and wondering where or whether or not this is real, let me say this clearly. Oh, it's real. Regulation is real. Relief is real. Intimacy that doesn't accumulate is still intimacy. What it wasn't was sustainable. And unsustainable systems don't need villains to collapse. They just need time. You don't need closure from someone who benefited from your presence without integrating it. Closure comes from understanding the structure you were in and choosing not to rebuild it elsewhere. You don't heal by getting answers. You don't heal by getting answers. You heal by stopping the labor that kept the confusion alive in the first place. The danger isn't caring too much. The danger is caring without return. Some return. They may not even be able to return the same thing. But in general sense, I would say that most people know what they need to return. And for whatever reason, this person couldn't. And the lesson here isn't to harden yourself or withdraw from connection. It is to notice where your regulation flows and whether it flows back. If it's not flowing back, then you have to stop throwing your regulation into that. Change your trajectory. Some people don't leave you because they don't care. They leave because they never learned how to stay without being held together. And when you stop holding, the system resolves itself quietly, finally. And if you're listening to this and something inside of you feels steadier than it did before, hey,
Come check
You
out You
already
Probably
know.
Right podcast. Society is
Probably
getting more
right.
unpredictable every day, but at the same time, predictable in its unpredictability. Say that 4 times real fast.
Take
Come
your
with me
guess.
as I attempt to find clarity in all the fog while staying way outside the box and kicking the box way down the road with my size 12 dogs. I use the Bible, experience, education, fortune, misfortune, life's lessons, life's mistakes to sort through all the mess. I talk about news, God, God, self-help, sports, sickness, health, music, parenting, love, humbleness, hurt, pain, joy, and all the things that might make you say, I never thought of it that way. Hopefully, anyway. Also, I take a stab at answering tough and not so tough questions, and all the while, understand that, listen, sometimes you end up in the hot seat and there's no thermostat. Well, that's how it is here. And because there's no topic, very few topics off the table, Torontonians will understand that Doug Ford reference there. Hopefully the podcast will be helpful and uplifting. And hey, maybe you'll find your own private Idaho here somewhere. Hope to see you soon.